Alright, so in this video we want to create a range function or similar function to range function. I'm going to call it my range. It takes three parameters, the starts and step, and then the return value is going to be a list of numbers. This part is going to be different from the actual range function because the actual range function returns a variable that is type range. It's a sequence of numbers, it's not a list or anything like that. But in this example, we are going to just simply return a list. Alright, the first step is to define a function, and that should be like basically like the first thing that you do every time when you want to create a function. You have the information that you need to do that, so I'm going to go ahead and define my function. I'm going to call it my range, which is the name that is given to me. It takes three parameters. First one is a start, second one is end, last one is step. You can pick different names if you want to. And it returns a value. I'm going to put this return here. I'm going to return none to remember what value I need to return at the end. Okay. If you leave it empty, it's going to also be none. So I'm going to put this none as a flag for myself as like, you need to return something. Just remember that. All right, now let's get to the function itself, what we need to do. So this function takes three parameters. We know a start has a default value of 0. So if you do not specify the start, it's going to be 0. For the step, the default value is going to be 1. And that is a way that range function works. And we want to replicate range function. So the start value should by default be 0, a step by default should be 1. For end, we don't have any default value because we expect the user pass at least one argument to this function, and that value should be assigned to end. The problem here is if I leave this function as it is, and if I try to call it, or even if I just run it, I'm going to get an error. So if I say 5 is going to be a positional argument and it's going to be assigned to start. So I'm overriding the default value for start, and then end does not get anything. So Python recognized that right away, and if I run it, it's going to stop right here. It's like non-default argument follow default argument. So you cannot have any default argument that comes before non-default argument, right? And that becomes problematic. The way to solve it is you either need to change the order of your variables or your parameters, or give a default value to all of your parameters. In this case, I always want to keep a start, the first parameter, and the second, and step the third one to make it very similar to range function. So then my only solution becomes give all of these variables, all of these parameters a default value. But I do not want to give any default value because I don't have any default value for end. The one around it is to assign none to it. Right? So you're simply saying it doesn't have any value, do not have anything, but I want to give it a default value. So you assign none to it. So now all of your values do have like a default setting, but your end, the default value for your end is none. So now let's see how this part becomes handy when we are dealing with cases such as this one. So I'm going to go ahead and try to create my range function. So first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create an empty list because at the end I want to return a list. So I'm going to create an empty list at the beginning, and then I'm going to fill this list based on the values that I have as my parameters. So since I'm going to fill out this list and I want to create a range of numbers, I'm going to go with a loop. I'm going to create a loop that traverses and basically creates create set of numbers and assign those numbers into a list. So I'm going to go with a for loop because I know exactly how many iterations I need to have. So I'm going to say for I in range of start to end and a step. Oh. And we want to say lsd.append, and we want to append I to it. All right. So at first I'm going to use range function, and then later I'm going to change it to something like use a while loop and do it without range function. But for now, let's just go with range function, see how we can make sure everything is working, and then I'm going to change it and take this range function out because we are trying to replicate range function. It's like sort of cheating if we use range function in it. All right, now I'm going to call the function. So if I call it this way, oh, at the end I'm going to return my list. All right, so now if I call my function the way that I have it, it's not going to work. Let me pass like more items so it works. And this is not going to print anything because this function is returning a value, and if I want to see the outcome I need to make sure I print it. So let's print it, see if we get the list that we want to. So here you go. So I want my start value to be 1 all the way to 4, and that with the steps of 1. So these are the values that I get, 1, 2, and 3, which is correct. If I change this one to, for instance, 10, if I run it, I'm going to get the list that I want. If I change the step to, for instance, 3, it's going to be 1, 4, and 7 because you're jumping 3. Okay, so far everything is like, it seems it's working. So now let's see if we can go in a reverse order. So I want to go from 10 to 1 with the steps of 3. So it should be with the positive step you cannot go from 10 to 1, so you need to take negative step, and let's take negative step 2. And here you go. So the first value is 10, jump 2 backward, 8, 6, 4, 2. Okay, and then the next value is going to be 0, which is out of range. So this is the list that you're getting. So this one works if you pass 3 numbers to it. Let's see if it works if you pass 2 numbers to it. So we only have a start and we have the end. Okay, it works fine because the default value for a step is specified in your function definition. So if you do not pass that value, it takes 1 as the default value. So if you pass 2 numbers, you have the start, you have the end, you're overriding their default value, and everything is working fine. So now let's see if it works if we pass only one value, which we meant the end value, right? So if you run it, we are going to get this error message because a start is going to be assigned a value of 5, and then end stays none. All right, and then you're trying to create a range from 0 to none, 5 to none, and range function won't like that because all the values that you can pass to a range function must be integer values. If you have anything else, in this example we have none, is going to complain. All right, how can we resolve this issue, right? So I'm going to show you something. So let's print this. So let's print start and step. All right, so let's run it. So here we go. So start is 5 in this example because we only passing one value to it. The end is 9 and the step is 1. Okay, if I pass 2 values, everything is going to be fine. Start is 1, end is 5, step is 1. If I pass 3 values to it, everything again going to be all right. The only time that we have issue is when we are passing only one value to it, and we simply, in that case, we want our end to take that value instead of the start. We want the start to have that default value. All right, so a good way of testing that kind of condition is, we know if we only pass one value to this function, your end is going to be none. Okay, so I'm going to say if end is equal to value none, that means you only passed one value to this function. All right, if you only pass one value to this function, you want that value to be assigned to end instead of a start. So I'm going to take the value that is assigned to a start and basically take that value, put it into end, and then reassign that value, reassign the default value for start. Okay, so the default value for start is going to be 0, and then whatever value that overrode the default value of a start is going to be assigned to end. All right, so if we do that, then we simply changing them around and making sure that one value that came to this function is assigned to end instead of start. All right, so now if I run it with one value, this should work. Okay, so this is very close to what we want to have. Now I want you to try to change this loop from for loop to a while loop. Okay, should be a simple thing. You just need to use your keyword while, have a like a set of condition for your header. Make sure you go enough to create all of the numbers that you want, and then you simply append them to your list. Okay, so pause this video, try to create a while loop that does the exact same thing, and everything else like this part and this part will stay the same. You're going to make sure if you pass only one value, that one value is assigned to end, and at the end you want to return your list. The only part that is going to change is this for loop. You want to take this for loop and convert it to a while loop. So pause this video, try to do that, and then after you complete it, come back and watch the rest of this video. I'm going to delete these two lines and replace it with a while loop. So for now, I'm going to take it very simple. I'm going to assume start is always less than end, assuming a step is positive. So I'm going to say as long as the start is less than stop value or end value. In this example, just say lst.append. Similar to the previous example, I want to append the start to my list, and then what I do is I'm going to add the step to the start. Okay, so if a step is 1, I'm adding 1 in each iteration. If a step is 2, I'm adding 2 to the start. So I go until I pass end or I'm equal to end, and that is the part that I should stop. So let's pass a couple of numbers here, see if we get the correct outcome. So 1 to 10 with the steps of 2, right? So if you run it, correct output. If I want to go to 5 with default a step of 1, I get 1, 2, 3, and 4. If I want to only go from to 5, I get 0 to 4. Okay, so it works fine as long as the step is positive. What happens if I do 5 to 1 and minus 1 as a step, right? I get nothing. Why? Because in this condition, I'm assuming a step is positive and I want to go as long as the start is less than end. In cases like this, should be the other way. As long as the start is bigger than the end value, I want to go. I want to reduce my start until I get to the end value, right? So that means this part is true if a step is less than or positive, if a step is bigger than 0. If it's positive, I want to do this. I want to say, okay, as long as the start is less than end, just keep going and blah blah blah. Okay, else meaning a step is positive, or you can have elif a step for a step bigger than 0. Okay, or less than 0, sorry. then you can have a different condition. I'm going to copy and paste here. I'm going to say as long as the start is bigger than n, and then here I'm going to subtract the, actually, you need to add to it because it is already negative, so that should do it. So here you go. So from, if we have 5 to 1, we should get 5, 4, 3, and 2, with going from 5 to 1, taking negative steps. All right. So if I do 10 to 1 with steps of 2, then 10, 8, 6, 4, and 2. All right. So you see, it's working if you want to use a while loop, but it is, of course, longer. But since we want to replicate the range function, it makes sense to not use range function itself. All right, so hopefully you get the idea, and if you have any question, you let me know.